what's called what's called the Sustainability Project. And these students, one year, they Grayson for being here, Miles for here, and possibly Line. They picked the topic that no one's picked before, and it's called the coastal development sustainable. And they looked at focus on the seaport district. This is a little Grayson, maybe thank you for showing up. A little background on why I picked this topic and what it's about.
It's really just about is coastal development sustainable. There's just like something that we're all kind of interested in, and we thought would be a good topic to research and learn about that. But yeah, it's really helpful for trigger.
And what did you focus on, Grayson?
I was just the economy, and the economical aspects of coastal development.
Yes. And the students looked at the seaport district and the rising tides, and the reading about the seaport district, how it's kind of been going underwater lately and going into dollars for the development. So they're bringing this project to a state showcase in Boston in June, along with a focus on alternative transportation and water pollution as well. So just want to leave this board here if you have any questions for us, or want to see what these guys did. Gracie, can you just mention like a little bit about your action act? You were thinking of doing?
Yeah, one thing that I was gonna do, it's not on the board right now because it came after, but I was gonna meet with representatives, Christina, and I have like a few potential laws to propose about like restrictions on building things on the coast area, like how close stuff can be to the shoreline and what it has to have to be that close. So,
and these guys already met once and interviewed her, so it's very exciting. You guys did a lot of work. With a very interesting topic. So, I think
Thank you so much, Grayson. We appreciate that, and we'll leave this up so that people can walk around and look at that. And Mazia, can you hear us? Are you able to speak? If you want to share a presentation too, you're able to do that as well.
Awesome, thank you. My audio completely disappeared. Hi folks, thanks for joining us today. I'm here to give a little bit of a presentation about the Cohasset Social Resilience Coalition that's been meeting for the past few months. My name is Enamazia Fonkum. I'm a climate resilience planner with Siler Climate Consulting, and we've been a partner with the town for about 3 years now. So I'm here to share a little bit about the work that we've begun to do in town. So our project history, in 2023, the town of Cohasset was awarded a municipal vulnerability preparedness grant from the state of Massachusetts to convene a core team, which is a group of volunteers and residents, to revisit the town's resilience priorities with a focus specifically on not just climate resilience, but social resilience. The core team brought together residents and municipal staff, and we went through a pretty rigorous community engagement process, which uncovered some priorities that intersected with social vulnerability, like transportation, power and energy, and food access. Given these things, we applied for and got a grant to do a seed project in town specifically focused on food justice. So we went with an approach to build both immediate resilience and long-term sustainability, including working to enhance fresh produce donations to the food pantry, working with Holly Hill Farm, doing food container gardening workshops to address both the transportation burden of getting fresh and organic foods and to build skills within the community. And then finally, we started creating guides like Cohasset Compost and climate smart native planting guides that were distributed throughout the town, particularly. So now we've been awarded a third grant by the state underneath that same municipal vulnerability preparedness grant. And we're really focusing on working with social service providers to find a place to where they can all be supported in one physical location. And that physical location can also work as a hub of, emergency preparedness and response for all community members. So it could serve as a warming or cooling shelter, to have backup generators and power, but it could also offer space for conference rooms and community meeting space and just become an overall hub of community access and support. And so the goals of this project are convening and institutionalizing our coalition, which is made up of social service providers and local organizations like the 143 Collective, Holly Hill Farms, the Cohasset Schools, and many other partners. We are currently in the process of identifying a location to build or support this community resilience hub. And then we're developing a plan as for now we've got the place, how are we going to get this done? And our hope is that we're going to enhance resilience through this process by creating an accessible physical space, building community trust, bridging some of these geographically isolated communities to resources, and then making sure that these social services in town are talking to each other and have a community to be able to offer more rigorous support.
And Demacia, I can take over if you want.
Beautiful. You got it, Abby.
Awesome. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Sorry, a little bit issues with the train. Can you share your screen though, please? So Demacia did a good setup of like why was the coalition formed, some background from 2013. These are a couple of members of the coalition, but like Demacia was saying, it's a group of social service providers, municipal staff, and other community partners. So for example, Holly Hill Farm is on it, 143 Exchange. We have some regional partners as well on the coalition, with the primary goal of planning and identifying a potential site for the Cohasset Community Social Resilience Hub. Next slide, please. So what is a resilience hub? Does anyone have their own definition or thoughts on what a resilience hub is to them? So this is our definition that we came up with as a coalition, that a resilience hub are community-led and community service serving places of belonging and collective care. So they're there not just during an emergency, but also during a blue sky day, offering people support, offering a space to thrive and community connectedness. The coalition has decided to create an actual physical building for the Resilience Hub. They're not always physical, but for Cohasset, it is going to be a physical place. Again, to coordinate connectivity, communication, distribute resources, and just increase that adaptive capacity of residents in Cohasset. And like I said, for emergency management support, but also day-to-day resilient needs for community members. Next slide, please, Demacia. So what's coming next? Currently, the coalition is evaluating potential site locations. So we're not going to build a new location. We're going to retrofit a current location. So right now we have about 15 locations within Cohasset that we're looking at, and we're going through the process of prioritizing them to identify 1 to 3 best sites that we can then move forward in the next stage. We do have a community-wide open house coming up, which I'll get into a little bit more detail in a second. This is on the handout that Charlotte shared with you, but you can go to our website to learn a little bit more, explore more of that background and what's been done. But next slide, please, Demacia. If you want to scan the QR code, this is the RSVP for the community open house. So we'll have coalition members there. We'll have about 6 engaging stations for you to learn more about the history, ask questions, give your input on what you all want this future social resilience hub to look like. It's going to be here June 4th, so that's a Thursday, and 6 to 8 p.m. And you can come at any time during that. It's not like a structured meeting. You get to like hop around where you want to, give input where you want to. Next slide, please, Demacia. But before we get some of your input and thoughts, any questions on the hub, the coalition, anything that we shared today? Yes.
What were the original needs that you saw that were unmet?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Demacia, can you scroll to like the 3rd slide, I think? Thank you. So these are kind of the three big buckets that we discovered during 2013. So one is transportation. The only train is the commuter rail in Cohasset. There's limited bike routes, and not all there's not sidewalks along every road, and not all sidewalks are connected. And things are spread out. So if you don't have a car, it's really hard to get places like the grocery store, or if there's an emergency and you need to go somewhere. So transportation was one. Power and energy. A lot of people don't have backup generators, and if the power goes out, I'm sure all of you know your food goes bad. You might have to, some people rely on electrical medical equipment, and currently, this is the only location that serves as like a warming shelter, but it's not open 24/7 into the evening or on the weekends. And then food access was another one. Again, during an emergencies, there's a few people in town that use the food pantry, and that's inaccessible during an emergency. Also having to cross like the highway to be able to get to a grocery store. So these were the three big buckets, and these are things that we're thinking about as we create the resilience of. So for example, transportation. Is there a site that is like easier to get to if you don't have a car, that you can walk to, having backup power at the site, and then thinking a lot around food access. Jane from the food pantry is actually on the coalition. So thinking of putting the food pantry into this hub, having like community meals, things like that. Any other questions? Awesome. And Namazi, do you want to move on to the activity?
Yes,
go to
I'm
the
just
last
gonna switch my screen.
Awesome. And then we're gonna do Mentimeter for everybody.
Awesome.
Okay. So we told you all this information about what a resilience hub is, but we want to know, what can Cohassets look like? So there's so many different features a hub can have, but it needs to be tailored to the needs of the community. So kind of going back to your question. So we have 3 questions for you that we would love to get your feedback on. If you all have a cell phone, there's going to be a link that you'll be able to log on, and we'll be able to see everybody's answers. So if you scan that, we'll be able to get everybody's feedback.
Is that gonna work for the 2 people on the call remotely?
Okay, yeah, this is originally our remote plan, but
Perfect. Okay.
next year. So.
Thank you.
You can also, go to menti.com if you're online and just type that code in.
Okay.
Using the QR. Do you hear any difficulties accessing? Awesome. And Namazi, do you want to show the question? So our first question is, Resilience Hub may act as gathering point, offering community space for free use. So what does a community gathering space need? So this kind of gets at, it's not an emergency. It's a beautiful day out like today, but we want to make sure that people want to come to this place. People want to talk to each other. People want to engage with each other. So what would make you want to come to a space? You want to type in your answer and then we can go over that. Power sources, we've heard that a lot, like making sure that there's ability to charge your phone, posted hours, access to store food when power goes out, or availability to provide essentials during an emergency.
turn off my phone in the car and I need, so I'm gonna say Wi-Fi.
Wi-Fi. Yeah. Yeah, you can feel free to like speak to your answer if you want. Wi-Fi is good. So answers to questions, kind of centralized source for needs. Someone.
Thank you.
So yeah, Wi-Fi. Are there any like a lot of great answers, but do any of you all go to like the community center or spaces outside of your home that you spend time in? And why do you choose to go there? Okay, nice. We are looking at the library, the churches, as hubs. We aren't looking at the schools just because we want to make sure this hub is open, like to the public during all hours of the day, and schools should be focused primarily on educating students. Good lighting, that is a good one. Any last thoughts on this one? Information on town laws and activities related to resilience, time to mingle, Wi-Fi, charge phones, warming and cooking. I like that. A link to existing community and art centers. Wilcott Commons is one of the sites we are looking at too. So I like whoever wrote extended hours. We are looking at how can we tailor like programs and sites that already exist to better suit the needs of the community. Positive leaders, adequate space for gathering, indoor and outdoor spaces. We've heard that a lot, so we definitely are looking at, are there places to maybe grow a garden, or a lot of the children that we've engaged with say they want space to play outside. Awesome electronically operated equipment, so different resources to be able to offer. Do you want to go to the next question, Endemazia?
Here we go.
Thank you. Okay, so Resilience Hub may host services for community flourishing. This can be like kitchens or tool libraries. I know it was mentioned before, like a space to store food, having access to electronic equipment. What other resources would you want available? This could be like skills, like access to a sewing machine, access to like the library. What other resources would you want available at this site? And again, it can be emergency related resources, but also just community related resources as well. A thrift shop community closet. We are planning on that. Someone on the coalition actually runs that, a toy library. I like that. Study rooms, late night coffee hours, printing access, movie theater space. So again, getting at that it's open during extended hours. And the coalition has talked about having like a projector space to have things like movies. Meeting space for nonprofits. And we want to make sure this is accessible so you don't need to pay for the spaces to be used. Showers and laundry. Anyone want to speak to any of these or share their ideas out loud?
I did the the study hours, the cafe stuff. Those are actually things that I've heard from residents directly. I was part of the MVP program where we did the beginning of the social climate resilience working towards a seed project. So in speaking to residents around town, like there was definitely something about there isn't much available for teenagers. There's nowhere really to go. In Cohasset, I'm sure there's obviously places to go, right? But so yeah, some people said study room, some people said, oh, can we do like a lake cafe kind of thing? I don't know if that's also like a separate business related matter, like maybe, Deeper Coffee or someone might have later hours, but yeah, the people were just kind of thinking about things to do, like maybe after school, after work. And then for teenagers.
That has come up a lot, yeah. Like the
Yeah.
library offers a lot of good engaging things for youth, but kind of that missing age. Themed events to encourage use, I like that one. Most of the suggestions as already available, public space underutilized areas. I don't know who wrote that one. So does anybody want to speak to that if that is you? And is there a space that you already see these happening in Cohasset? A centralized space.
I didn't write that comment, but I think Cohasset provides all these things already. So I don't see the purpose of having it in one place.
Yeah, so I think what we are thinking of is having it in one place makes it accessible. A lot of people, at least getting at some of the resources that are available, like job resources, clothing, food. Sometimes it's really hard to know how to access that, who to go to. So having like a centralized area makes it easier for people to know, like, this is where I can go for this. But great point that these are things that are happening. We don't want to repeat like what is already in Cohasset, but just getting at like what can we add to it to make it more resilient is the point. Yeah. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. But I frankly don't see the need.
Okay. You want to speak? I don't want to put you on the spot. Do you want to like add on a little bit more to that?
Well, I'm elderly, obviously.
Yeah.
And like in the snowstorms in February. I mean, I didn't have power for 2 days, but you couldn't get to a central place anyhow because I have a combined driveway with other people and trees were down.
Yeah.
So, the fact that there was something central wouldn't make any difference.
Yeah. That has come up a lot, and we've talked about in the coalition of maybe like a mobile like resource distribution access, or we've talked about like, is there like a transportation access that can take people to that? Those are all great points. But again, getting at that core issue of not having power for 2 days, that is really hard for people. So how can we make this an accessible space that people can get to, knowing all those challenges that you just stated? So we don't have like all the answers. We're like trying to plan, where can this be best located? What are the options of like making maybe mobile resources to get to some of those points you said, because those are all great points. Books and reading materials. Okay, making existing resources more visible. Need a shuttle snowplow to access people. Yes, that has come up quite a lot. So we are thinking through that, because people need to be able to get to the hub. Yes.
What numbers of the population you think need this here in Cohasset?
Off the top of my head, I don't like have numbers like that. Again, like Charlotte was saying, we've been speaking to community members since 2013 around like resilience issues and like issues accessing these spaces. And we've identified like priority communities, so people that don't have a car, low income, elderly, people that like face extreme challenges when it comes to climate issues and emergencies. So it might not be the larger population that comes here every day, but the larger population, when there is power outages and things like that, would be able to use this. But the everyday aspect, when it comes to resources, like for example, food pantry or clothing, obviously not everybody in Cohasset needs that, but there are some in Cohasset that need that. But during an emergency, a lot of people need access to a space like that, and emergency resources.
No, I've just worked in the field for 40, 50 years of social services and mental health. And this is a super wealthy town. And I think those resources are out there for the small number in our town that need it. I think it's more publicizing where these are and accessing that, my opinion, versus creating another whole structure for it.
We are not creating a new structure. We
But
are
you're saying a hub, a structural space.
a way to centralize those sources so people know how to get to them. Because if I heard you correctly, you said they are out there, but people might not know that they're there. Yes. So we're not recreating it. We're not creating our own social services. It's a centralized hub. So being able to say, hey, do you need this? This is either here or we can refer you to there. Or even have like, just off the top of my head, like having visitor hours of certain resources like that. So it's not recreating the wheel, like you said. Cohasset does have these things. It's just like someone said here, centralizing it, making sure people know how to access it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what they do, but they actually have a social worker in Situate at the library. I was shocked when I saw the sign.
Yeah.
But I just see so many of these community buildings are totally underutilized. There's nobody in them.
Yes. To your point, and how do we draw people
Whether even
into
here,
that?
even this building.
Yeah, so we want to make it like to the first question, a place people want to come to. Because if you want to come to it, then you'll know the resources. And I learned that the Cohasset Library actually has social services that come, but people don't know that either. So Cohasset does have these things, but how do we get them out there? How do people know? If there is a hub and you're like, I wonder if it has that, that could be an easy way to be like, I'm gonna go there and see. But
Also, in between like the large issues that we identified in the first round, the breaking down the silos of communicating where all these resources are, that definitely seemed to be the largest point that like people didn't know about, because we talked to people from obviously the food bank, from local regional places, we talked to social workers, and it's like, oh, everyone does all these awesome things and not everyone knows where all those are. So yeah, definitely trying to get the word out there through a center, through our websites, through all the above. Like there's so many amazing things, like you said, that Cohasset already does and the South Shore already does, but a lot of people really don't know. So breaking down those silos and showing people all the resources that are available, and then making people feel comfortable to come in and ask, or to go on the website or fill out surveys. So yeah, that was definitely one of the challenges that we saw from the town side and the resident side, that there's a lot of people that do a lot of great things and not everyone knows where those are or what people do, you know?
But isn't publicity the answer to that rather than what you're describing?
so publicity is an aspect of that, but also some people don't seek, this is just an example. Some people don't seek resources because it can be stigmatized. That's like a reason. So creating a place that is open to all community members, from the wealthiest to like low income, a place that serves everyone, people feel like they belong. That in that example is easier to access it. So publicity is one of them. But if people know that there is this hub that you can access resources, you don't need to be able to know the full like gambit of resources this hub access. But if you know it can serve as like a centralized location to know where they are, that in itself serves as like a publicizing way of resources as well.
And Abby, I think, can we take maybe one or two more questions? We're running a little bit over, but yeah, if that's okay with you guys.
Today, when somebody go to that hub and say, these are the reasons, give the person go together.
So, like I said, it doesn't have to be physical. To my knowledge, Cohasset does not have a hub like that. That's virtual.
So you think phasing, would that be would that be a first phase type of action so people then start to know where the resources exist?
That is a great point. I can bring it back to the coalition. I know that their focus is on a physical space just to get at the like food pantry aspect of it. But that is a great point to like being able to like start congregating all of those resources before the physical hub.
Well, it seems to get you there now, they're relatively not a program, so I assume it's not top the program, something like this, as opposed to trying to get everybody agreeing where it should reside,
Yeah.
you know, and then getting all the agreements of the people currently own facilities that run the facilities. Maybe that's just a thought, a quick way of getting a virtual hub is out there that
Yeah, that is a great point.
it doesn't exist today.
Not that I'm aware, but I think we can also, Cassandra's kind of the main contact from the town for this, right? Yeah, so I think just kind of keep the the agenda moving along. Cassandra Thayer, our town planner, she definitely is kind of the project lead for this. I'm definitely happy to forward questions. I'm just a little slow over email, so I apologize for that. But yeah, I mean, if you guys have feedback or things that you think of after the fact of, oh, actually I do have a thought, or oh, I have some more feedback, then Cassandra would be a great person to reach out to, because that's why we're having this. We really do appreciate hearing from you guys and what we need, what we don't need, what's already been done, what needs to be done. So yeah, it's good to hear from everyone. We definitely heard things a few years ago, and it's good to hear slightly different things now and kind of combine what we're seeing here. So
Before Cassandra will be there, so will coalition members. So if you have ideas that you want to have a conversation about, please join us then. Thank you all for your time.
thank you, Abby. Thank you, guys. All righty. So I guess now we can move on to the next topic on our agenda, which you guys are aware of. It's for the Gulf River project through the Office of Massachusetts Office of Coastal Management's Coastal Habitat Water Quality Grant Program. So we received a grant with the town of Situate to do a project to assess the Gulf River estuary system. So we have our project team here, Mary and Adam from Woods Hole Group. And we have some of our team in the audience, Jen Smith from the town of Situate. And we also have Jason Bertner from Office of Coastal Zone Management here. And we can pull up the slide presentation in just a moment. And also, we think we have Jack Buckley in here if he's still around. Yeah. Oh, do you step out? Okay.
He was going to come up and introduce himself.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, guys. They're all scattered right now. So, and then last but not least, we also have Alex Mansfield from the North and South River Watershed Association. So our team is kind of all here in pieces, and we can help with questions at the end as well. But with that being said, I'm going to pull up the presentation, and I'll let Mary and Adam take over. Let me know if you guys can see this in the. All right. Let's see. How's that looking? There we go.
I'm gonna like.
Also, if you guys want to talk, like the camera's right.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mary Scholl. I'm a coastal scientist with Woods Hole Group. We are kind of the technical leads. Woods Hole Group is the technical lead on this project for developing a comprehensive restoration plan for the Gulf River Estuary. As Charlotte mentioned, I'm joined by a lot. We didn't really know what the layout of the room would be like today, so sorry for the rather formal layout.
We don't mean to be lecturing behind the podium.
Didn't expect a podium.
Yeah. I think
Sorry.
No, it's okay. But to that end, I think that we're really interested in being here tonight, in part to share what we're doing out on the estuary, but in part to hear back from you. And I think that one thing that I wanted to lead with was just acknowledging the background and experience that we have in the room, with Jack in the room, with Jason Bertner, who's had decades of experience working in this system, Alex Mansfield, North-South Watershed Association. So we've got a lot of knowledge in the room. And I think if we can share out what we're doing in the estuary and what we've been up to and some of the initial results of that effort, we're really interested in hearing back from the group tonight to try to make this as collaborative meeting as possible.
They had one quick person, Angel May sitting in front from CSCR.T, and Charlie Daney, who worked on doing a comprehensive report presented at our State of the Harbor. So 2 important members of our team.
Great.
For sure. And we've mentioned a lot of names, so I apologize. I'm Adam Finkel, Senior Coastal Scientist with Woods Hole Group. I'm here with Mary tonight. Jack just spoke up. And Jason, did you want to introduce yourself as well, just so we're connecting all the dots here?
Sure, Jason Bertner, Coastal Zone Management. I'm the South Shore Regional Coordinator.
And then we mentioned Alex's name as well, just trying to connect the dots. Yeah.
Alex Mansfield, the watershed ecologist for the Watershed Association. I'm also the South Shore coordinator for the Mass Bays National Estuary.
All right.
Awesome.
I think we're close.
Yeah.
Tying it all together. All right.
This is our, list that is clearly even missing some folks, but just to give you a sense of, who's on the project team and who we're really working with over the next year and a half on this project. but let me just start back at the beginning. So just to prime us here, I just wanted to give an agenda, a brief project overview of why we're here today, what we're talking about as far as this grant funding. We will give you guys an update on the schedule and the timeline for the grant. And then I will dig into some of the project tasks and our scope of work. So, and what we've been up to over the past couple of months, as well as some preliminary findings. And then we hope to kind of have a facilitated discussion about what's shared and if there's any questions about the presentation, or we're just interested in hearing about your experience with the estuary and how we can kind of incorporate some of your feedback into our planning process. So, and just to set the scene here, this is the Gulf River Estuary. This is the sort of estimated project area that we're talking about. This white line is not an exact, acreage by any means, but we are mostly focused on the coastal resources within the Gulf River Estuary. As you all know, it borders the town of Cohasset and the town of Scituate, so both towns are heavily involved in the project. The northern reach starts up at Cohasset Harbor, and then the system branches down into two reaches, which we call the southern and the eastern reach, one ending in Musquashkett Pond, and then the other kind of intersecting with the MBTA line down in the southern part of this figure. So just to give you a sense of where we have been working. So why do we want to develop a comprehensive restoration plan? So just to kind of ground you all in the ideas we had as far as this funding and this project, first we want to improve the coastal habitat and the water quality impairments in the estuary. So there are climate change and anthropogenic stressors like sea level rise and storm surge and land use development and increased nutrient loading to the system. So we are here to try to assess and plan and prioritize solutions to those current stressors. The second goal here being to really build resilience and plan for the future. So having a understanding of next best steps to take and really a framework for guiding decision-making for future resilience actions and best management practices under these future climate change scenarios is what we are also investigating. Third, we're also interested in fostering advocacy and stewardship for the Gulf River Estuary. So how can we build long-term community and student advocacy and stewardship by integrating students and partners and community members into this process? So this is kind of the start, the kickoff of this process. And we hope you all can kind of invest in the long-term future of this system. So to dive into some of our more concrete objectives, how are we doing this for this grant? We are first evaluating the vulnerability of, sorry, I'm like trying to move this screen. Okay, great. First, we're evaluating the vulnerability of the estuary's coastal resource areas under present and future scenarios. And then we're determining stressors and opportunities for action for restoration. With this, we'll also be developing a baseline report of the Gulf River Estuary. So what is the current condition of the estuary, and some plans as far as what we should be achieving in the future for restoration actions. And then we will develop some graphics-focused conceptual designs of those restoration plans for top priority marsh restoration actions. And as we sure. As we've already touched on, we hope you all can be part of that process for, refining some of those actions as we move through this project over the next year. And our last point is engaging the community and invested stakeholder groups in this planning process and really advocating for the advancement of restoration activities within the estuary, which are going to require future funding and future work to kind of see through to the construction phases. So, not to bore you with our list of tasks, but it really helps you all understand the scope of this grant. So again, this is a very high-level planning exercise. This first task is about evaluating the site and collecting field data. So we have been reviewing existing documentation, what is already out there as far as data that's been collected in the system. How can we kind of synthesize it to tell a story about the current condition? Woods Hole Group deployed tide gauges and completed a tidal study this winter, which we'll touch on in a little bit. We also, Jack and his team has been looking at the water quality data that's been collected in the system for the last couple of decades and analyzing that to understand trends over time. And then our team also completed a marsh and estuary field assessment, which I will also describe more, but it's a lot of field work in this task. The second task is about evaluating the existing and future conditions of the estuary. So we were using geospatial tools and data to map future flood risk and marsh migration potential, which we'll share a little bit about. Task 3 is about developing those habitat restoration actions and then going through that prioritization process with partners and other technical folks who can help us really start to make sense of which actions to take, first and foremost. Our fifth task is for developing the actual restoration plan and the actions through conceptual plans, which are more graphics based. And we also have scope and budget dedicated to outreach. So convening technical stakeholder groups like this meeting and thinking through some solutions as a group. So just to put this on a timeline for you all, the project started in November of 2025. Between December and March, we've been out in the field a few times. Our project team had a site visit where we walked to kind of priority areas together as a group and got to know the estuary. Woods Hole Group completed an existing documentation review. So we pulled together all of that existing data, which I'll share in a little bit. And then we completed a future conditions assessment. So again, looking at flood risk and marsh migration potential using some mapping tools. We are now in the April to June timeframe. So we've convened one technical committee. That group is obviously, as the name says, it's a more technical group. So focused on, understanding different restoration techniques that can be employed in the estuary, whether they have local knowledge of some of the ecological problems or challenges that are going on in the system. So we did form that technical committee and we hosted one meeting so far. Today's our first public meeting for this project. So thanks all for being here. We are also planning between now and June to develop some of those water quality and restoration actions. So that's in process now that we've collected a bunch of the data over the winter. And then our alternatives analysis and prioritization process is also coming this spring. The project has an end date of December 31st, 2026. And between June and December, we're going to be drafting and finalizing that restoration plan and those conceptual restoration actions. Does anybody have any questions so far? I don't mean to just talk at you for a very long time. Okay. Hearing none. So I'm going to dive into some of the tasks that we've been working on. So just to give you a list as far as documenting some of the existing data and conditions of the system that we will plan to put into this report. So some data sets we took a look at, which are publicly available, are understanding, what parcels in the marsh are private versus public, where's the protected open space and public access. These are often areas where we could work more quickly because they're already publicly held, so we can implement restoration actions on them more efficiently than privately owned parcels. We took a look at stormwater infrastructure. So we documented and took a lot of data on culverts and other stormwater infrastructure. We have wastewater treatment infrastructure that we have mapped also through various MassGIS tools. We took a look at unvegetated to vegetated ratio of marshes, which is a USGS planning tool, and it's just kind of an indicator of resilience overall. The lifespan of marshes is another sort of resilience scoping tool. We mapped the shellfish resources for the estuary And then we did sort of an inventory of the past restoration resilience projects or monitoring that has taken place over the last decade or so, just to kind of synthesize all that's been collected, try to make sense of what's going on.
Mary, could you, on that last slide, just talk a little bit more about the unvegetated to vegetated ratio and the lifespan of marshes relative to marsh resilience, just to try to contextualize that for.
Yeah, I actually have a slide on it.
Yep.
I might as well. We can skip to this. This is I think what's becoming a popular USGS tool to kind of assess where vulnerable marshes in the state are. So the unvegetated to vegetated ratio calculates the ratio of unvegetated marsh, so pools, bare areas, mud flat, to vegetated areas. So that ratio is kind of an indicator of vulnerability or resilience. But the big takeaway here is that this system has a relatively low UVVR, which is a good thing. So it's more resilient compared to other systems nearby or in Massachusetts. And that's because it has mostly an intact marsh platform, meaning the vegetation is doing well, it's intact, and there's low fragmentation. So if we had more ponding and more pools throughout the marsh platform, we would get a higher UVVR. So the darker green is indicative of a lower ratio. Yeah.
Could you just repeat the color coding? What is the very light green or even yellow? What does that indicate versus the darker green?
Yeah, so from this figure, the darker greens would be more resilient and the lighter greens would be less resilient. So meaning, yeah, more vulnerable, more impacted by sea level rise or other conditions. Yeah.
And perhaps I missed it. Do you share how you collected this data? Was it from various resources or was it your own?
This is a scoping tool that's available through this one. Which one? This one? These were all available data sets. So I'll get into the stormwater infrastructure. We added some, just through field work, added some additional data to that. Okay, yeah, I will get to that. But yeah, these are mostly just collecting things that are already publicly available, but kind of refining them to this estuary and summarizing that data to make sense of what's going on here. And then just to quickly go through the protected open space, I think it was just worth noting that where the public protected areas are within the system. So in Cohasset, most of the salt marsh was privately owned. Then we have the Pegram Preserve. That's nearly 15 acres, which our project team took a nice walk along and got to see some of the challenges there. In Situate, the larger marsh parcels are owned by the town. So we can see by the green that it's a little bit more just publicly owned as far as marsh property. So this is just helping us make sense of kind of some areas that we might want to zoom in on for restoration actions.
Good.
Yeah.
Staying on that slide, could you?
This one?
Identify where is the Situate publicly owned versus the Tibbetts Marsh Conservation Area, or are they the same?
Great question. That is not shown in this figure. There's another one that shows the difference between the towns, but the Tibbetts Marsh, that is Situate owned.
While we're on the slide.
Yeah.
Is any of the marsh that has no color coded privately held?
Yeah. Yep. That's a good point to highlight. Yep.
The privately owned, what kind of communication has been shared about the projects, or is that going to be later in the phase about sharing the floor treatment plan with residents who own property in the estuary?
Yeah, that's a great question. Charlotte, do you want to answer that because you've been mostly in contact?
Right now, we're definitely introducing part of this meeting. And then at some point, probably later this year in the fall, we're definitely going to share this data a lot more and, talk about our draft restoration plan and get feedback from you guys. So I'll definitely work on, notifying homeowners and posting it as much as we can. I don't know if anyone lives along the Gulf, I did try to send a letter out to the Cohasset residents, so I'll try my best to send it out more in advance next time. But yeah, we'll definitely keep the residents and the town in the loop when our next public meeting will be later this year to kind of discuss the findings in more detail, as well as our potential solutions and recommendations of restoration and how that would involve obviously
Well,
private and.
Yeah, I guess my question is not really about the
Okay.
town's doing it,
Oh,
but
okay.
how is the research group, the group that's leading this, or maybe it is a town communication with probably both Situate and Cohasset, making sure we're residents. So
Absolutely. Yeah, I think,
Yeah.
we're working mostly with Tolbert from Town of Cohasset and Town of Situate, so, from the towns, and we'll definitely do our best to notify everybody, who lives along the Gulf and the public of, keeping this information, and we're gonna be posting it, at least for Cohasset, we're posting, our information to the Conservation Commission office page. And I can definitely share that with you, and we'll post the slides and the recording and everything from this meeting as well.
So does that mean there will be a separate Situate open meeting?
I think we were kind of planning to have the second meeting in Situate, right, Jen?
That was about.
Yeah, so we were thinking of kind of having like a kick, the opening meeting here and then trying to reach out to the residents of Situate as well, possibly having the second meeting in Situate. And it will still be hybrid, so obviously if you guys don't want to drive down to, Situate, we'll definitely have. For hybrid.
Yeah.
But is this meeting the first meeting that the Situate residents were invited to as well?
I believe so, yeah,
There are no any letter from mail, but it was shared social media.
Yeah.
Yep. But yeah, in summary, most of the communications for this project is going through the towns. That's why we have this big project team. But Woods Hole Group, we're more focused on the kind of research technical side, leaning on the towns to do a lot of the communications and sharing of our data.
Just on the website, we did do a brief advertisement through the spot, and then if you guys attended the State of the Harbor, I did like a little brief intro. So yeah, if you guys have any suggestions on how to share this for the next public meeting, definitely let me know. I'd love to figure out what's best of who looks at what the most, I don't know, if people go on Facebook or look at the website more than, I think people might, so. Yeah.
Yep.
And then the letters will definitely, I'll send all the letters out to the class residents again to live along.
I think it needs to be bigger than the golf though, because,
Yeah.
and for the last. The beginning session on 5:30 to 6, the big problem is we don't have enough newspaper.
Yeah.
And we need a way to communicate that is available to everybody.
Absolutely.
Do your best.
We did try to do the stroll. Is that something that people read a lot, or is that not so much? Okay. Yeah, we can definitely try our best to advertise that more to the general public. We definitely wanted to see at least with the residents who live along the Gulf, we wanted to try and get some, early input, but yeah, I agree with you. For the larger meeting, we'll try to reach out to everybody.
So if you send these letters to the Cohasset residents along the river, where Situate residents live.
I don't know about the Situate residents.
I didn't know it.
Okay,
It's on my list.
we'll work on that for the fall, yeah. We appreciate the feedback, though, we really do, because I'll definitely try to get it out in a much wider sense for the fall.
Yep, definitely. And this is just the kickoff here. So this will be, recorded and available for folks who weren't here today, but there's other opportunities to come to the next meeting where we have, more actions and things to discuss through as a larger group, I think. So this is one of a few opportunities. Okay. So moving on to our title study, like I had mentioned, Woods Hole Group deployed 6 different tide gauge sensors during the month of December to early January. And these sensors spanned the whole system, and they measure water level or tide information over the course of the month, capturing readings every 6 minutes. They also measure water temperature and salinity. So again, not to get into too many of the details, but we have this data now. We're able to understand how the waters moves through the system, how it possibly attenuates under different tidal crossings. But basically, just to highlight some main takeaways, we do know that the northern crossing in Gannett Road, so where water level 5 is, this is Gannett Road. For those, you probably all know that more than I do. But that northern crossing is only slightly dampening high tides between, this side and the other side of it. So it's a very minor influence of that culvert, but overall, in addition, water level 3, which is just upstream of, this reach, has no tidal attenuation. So really those bridge spans are not they're not causing any sort of issues as far as restricting flow into these sections of the marsh. It was, and obviously observed by our team also, that down near water level 4, this is a really beautiful freshwater marsh system. So there was no tidal influence as far up as here. And that's just past Hollett Street is where we kind of made that determination that it transitions to fresh marsh. So these are just some.
Quickly, there is that pinch point between Cohasset Harbor and the Gulf by the Rocky outcroppings at the Border Street Bridge. Looking to see if you saw any either any impact on the hydrology or desynchronizing the high tides between Station 1 and Station 2.
From my memory, there was very little tidal attenuation, so it didn't appear to be much of an influence. Yeah.
And if I remember correctly from the summary, by the time you get up to water level 5 and 6, and Mary, you can hold me accountable if this isn't quite right. I do think that there's almost a 2-hour delay by the time you get all the way upstream in the system, but we weren't seeing a significant difference in the high tide elevation between water level 1 and 2. But we did see a delay by the time we got up.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
And I think just to reinforce one of the points that Mary made, with a lot of systems that we work in, if there are bridge spans or culverted crossings or road crossings over the marsh, almost always we're seeing what's called tidal attenuation, which is a dampening of the tide and a restriction of that seawater from being able to propagate and move all the way upstream in the system. And so there's a big movement statewide to remove those obstructions, restore tidal flow, restore additional marsh, increase habitat connectivity for things like river herring or diamondback terrapins, things that wouldn't otherwise be able to cross under the road. And just like Mary mentioned about the marsh ratio, we're actually seeing that, hey, the elevations out here remain pretty resilient, more resilient than some other systems due to the impacts of sea level rise and other climate impacts. We're also encouraged by the fact that we're not seeing major restrictions to the tide in this system. So that's another kind of positive working in favor of the Gulf.
Yep. To follow up on an earlier question about the inventory of tidal crossings and outfalls. So we did capture a subset of crossings and outfalls as far as stormwater and tidal flow throughout the system. We ended up surveying elevations and dimensions of 13 different structures, and they were really chosen based on sort of the proximity to the marsh, if they were either draining into the marsh or very close by with a channel that was feeding into the main channel of the system. So this is, going to be very helpful in the future for, well, first of all, I think there's a kind of a statewide push to better document the elevations and dimensions of all of our tidal crossings and our stormwater infrastructure. But for this project, it was important to kind of do this inventory to understand potential tidal restrictions to the system. We have these accurate elevations and dimensions of our structures, where the water is really moving and where stormwater inputs are coming from. So we can better understand the inputs to the system. Does anyone have any questions about that? I'm going to
standard title crossings, I'm not sure what outfalls are.
Yeah, that's a great question. So hopefully this slide is a little more helpful. So when we're talking about outfalls and catch basins, outfalls are these drainage pipes that are draining to either catching stormwater and draining to the marsh, in this example. And then a catch basin is, again, one of those like grates that you see on the street that's catching stormwater and runoff. And it usually, if I'm incorrect here, correct me, but it's usually connecting to an outfall pipe. So it's channeling that water to a specific section of the marsh. And then a culvert takes on many different forms, but this is, an example of sort of a bridge span crossing, concrete culvert. So what did I say? A concrete box culvert here. But yes, those take on many different forms as well. You might see like a rounded shape, but it's just a way for tides to flow underneath an obstruction.
And the reason we're also interested not just in the crossings, but the outfalls and the catch basins is because in a system that only has one opening, we're concerned, or we like to be aware of, from a water quality perspective, where the nutrients and other potential contaminants are making their way onto the marsh. And so if there are opportunities to potentially intercept some of that stormwater flow, or treat that stormwater flow before it makes its way out onto the marsh, we just want to have an inventory of where those features are so that we can potentially implement some remediative steps if and where it makes sense.
And do you have a sense of how much of that comes from sort of point sources like that versus, all the residential?
That's a great question. I would need to do some heavier math. Jack, your group, because completely acknowledging that, if there are things like fertilizer treatments or pesticide treatments on yards, or alternatively just groundwater that's leaching out of the bank and making it onto the marsh plain, those are significant inputs as well. I think the difference with the catch basins and outfalls is it really concentrates the flow from really long stretches of road into the catch basin and through the outfall pipe onto the marsh. So it's a more concentrated source. But I don't have a specific answer to that question.
Yeah, sorry, I'm late. My time's messed up. I live up on the Bound Brook end of the marsh. I saw you folks dropping through the marsh there in this winter time. It's a good view. Some of the things that you people probably don't know, and I've lived here all my life and I'm soon to be 85, so I got a little bit of time in green. The pools that you talked about, there's a lot more of them than there used to be.
Yeah,
I've got a big pool in my backyard that I've slowly been filling in. I read one of somebody's marsh studies and filling in with the old marsh grass, and it's coming back up again. But there's a lot of them. There's a lot of the marsh has disappeared, particularly on the run that heads up towards Gannett Road to the south. There was a big long peninsula, and I've been telling them, you watch, pretty soon it'll all be gone, and it's gone. I've lost about close to 30 feet of marsh in my backyard. You might have, I don't know, did you come through that low tide that went South Main Street?
We did, yeah.
There's a big gravel bank off of one thing. Well, that was all marsh, and all those big boulders, big rocks out there, they were never visible 15 years ago. So the grass is dying, sod falls away, and the marsh retreats back. So we've got a major pollution with this nitrogen. We used to have a big phosphorus problem. That's been taken care of. But there's a whole lot of stuff. There's a whole lot of dynamic that's going out there that on a quick walk around and look at a survey, you may not be aware of all of the implications.
And I think that feedback's really helpful, and that's really why we're here tonight. One of the things that we led with as Mary was kicking off the presentation was there's a lot of knowledge in the room. And so
I've been 50 years of where I am now, and I've lived here all my life. We used to hunt out there when I was a kid. So there's a whole lot of information that's out there, but there are not too many people my age so now. So.
Well, thanks for coming out tonight, and we are saving plenty of time to talk this through with the group.
So I would take that jumping in the middle of your cut.
That's perfect.
Mary, I have a quick question. Is there a spatial relationship between the outfalls and the vegetated, unvegetated?
That's a good question. I didn't not look at that yet.
That's a good question, yeah.
And I have a
taking
question,
notes
for
here
the
too.
13 red dots that represent.
Yeah.
alcohol, is that just data that you got, or did you actually walk to each one of these places?
This is where we actually walked and surveyed the structures. Yeah, so this is in 2 pages in our inventory. We have now like a catalog of what we surveyed. But yeah, you can see that there are specific elevations that are captured for each of these dimensions. So, but yeah, we can get more into kind of how nutrients can play a role in marsh health and vegetation growth in our future slide. But I think that would be an interesting exercise to look at where the outfall pipes are and where they overlay with those marsh scores, I guess, of resilience. I'm going to move on to our wetland assessment. So in addition to the tidal study and the inventory we did on the stormwater infrastructure, we had a field team that was specifically dedicated to looking at the coastal habitat or the salt marsh. So we went out in January. It was actually a very beautiful day. Jack met us out there for part of the day. So we were doing a couple of different things while we were there. We did end up breaking out this map shows how we kind of describe the system, within our team, but also how we would probably narrate it in the report. So it's broken up by the northern reach, which we're calling management zone 1.
Little hard to see.
Yeah, sorry, it's a little light.
Management, because it's such a large system, if you were to present a map like this when you're trying to think about restoration actions, you really got to squint your eyes. So the reasoning behind this is to basically break down the system into manageable management zones where you can be really site specific with any actions that you might develop or recommend. So to Mary's point, you've got the northern reach here. So that's management zone 1, the eastern reach here, that's management zone 2, and what we're calling the southern reach here, management zone 3. And spatially, they represent basic breakpoints within the system, and they break the marsh down into manageable chunks when you're starting to think about what could potentially be done.
Mm-hmm.
You wanna?
Yeah.
Why did you start management zone 3 so far to the north? That practically goes almost as with the Situate, in the first parish road, almost a Situate house. But any reason you stopped it there?
You're saying
Maybe just more of a brook type of thing at that point.
You're talking about the management zone 3 bottom, right?
Yeah.
The reason we kind of packaged that one a little bit further upstream was because that's where we really saw a dramatic transition from a fully tidal system to a primarily freshwater.
Okay, thank you.
So what we might recommend would differ.
Yeah.
right. Yeah, that's a great point. So
Go sulfur?
go more south, is that what he was asking? Yeah.
How'd you know when to stop?
Our team was out there. I was not personally in that location, but we're able to, through vegetation, understand when the marsh kind of stops and it becomes an upland. So we can look at the data points that we collected over there, kind of understand where it ends. Yeah. Okay, so to summarize the field assessment that we completed on the marsh, we were doing a couple different things. So we established 27 stations throughout this whole system. One of the things we did was verified the land cover type when we went to that point. So we mapped out 27 stations prior to going in the field. We visited each of those when we were out there, and we had an existing land cover type map that we were using to try to verify and understand is the map that we have publicly accessible to us accurate with what we were seeing on the ground. So we were recording what we observed as far as land cover. We also took note of the vegetation type, just provided a description of what we were seeing at that location. And then we identified different ecological stressors. So I'm going to get into that in a future slide, but really when we're out there trying to think about what is potentially degrading or looking stressed within the system, and what might be looking very healthy on the flip side. And then again, we established these different management zones. So we were also kind of like verifying that distribution of the zones while we were out there as well. So to just provide an example, this is in the northern reach, so zoomed in. These are just a subset of the rapid assessment points that we visited, and they're named by the land cover type that we verified. We also took a bunch of pictures in different cardinal directions at each station, so we have that documented as well. Just wanted to provide you all with a photo. This is of the Pegram Preserve, kind of at the upland edge of that area. So when we were thinking about ecological stressors, I guess we just wanted to share some of the main takeaways that we found. And to Adam's earlier point, I think we often work in systems on the Cape that are much lower in elevation and much more severe. So I think to us walking out on the marsh, it was very hopeful to see a lot of high marsh vegetation out here. I think it stands a better chance with restoration, stands a better chance for survival. So some things that we're seeing, and this is kind of like your description of some ponding and dieback, right? So this is what you were describing as far as.
Yeah, from kind of a super saturation, ponding, dieback is where you start to see in the top left there a bit of standing water on the marsh, even at low tide. And any marsh is going to have kind of a mosaic of cover types. It's not going to be all of one thing or the other. But to my point, when I was referring to ponding, I think to this gentleman's point, when he was referring to ponding, it's areas that are not draining at low tide and areas that over the course of years or decades are starting to expand that bare area where vegetation's dying back and ponded water ends up being that much more persistent. And again, to Mary's point, I think that there were some things out on the marsh that made us a little bit more optimistic and a little bit more hopeful. And just reiterating them, one is the lack of tidal restrictions. Two is the naturally occurring higher elevations on the marsh. We're seeing a lot of high marsh grasses that are typically associated with those higher elevation systems. And we're not seeing areas that have subsided or dropped in elevation to the point where they're bare over acres. We might be seeing some bare areas over pools or in particularly stressed or poor drained areas, but we're not seeing acres of dieback like we are in some other systems that we're working in on the South Coast and on the Cape. Yes, sir.
Just could you clarify what kind of water is in the pools? Is it salt water left over from a high tide?
Typically,
Okay.
yes. That's not making its way back to the channel and drain.
Why do you think the marsh is better off?
Why is this
compared to others?
compared to others? It's
Yeah.
driven by that elevation.
Okay.
Yeah, so what we're observing on the marsh, and I think that Mary has a slide that shows this.
Oh, yeah, we could skip ahead to this.
Well, yeah, actually, why don't you take it away?
I guess I just wanted to contextualize some of the things that we observe when we're out there. So this is what we meant in this previous slide where we are talking about eroding ditches or widening ditches. So you see that exposed peat. When the peat is unvegetated, it's subject to greater erosion. So it's going to wash away much quicker without vegetation there, which leads to more subsidence and more widening of that ditch. So you're just losing salt marsh. Low marsh is what, this circled area, it's that taller Spartina alterniflora. It's called smooth cordgrass. We found that typically along the edges of the ditches and just the edge of marsh. So that type of vegetation grows at a slightly lower elevation than what we're referring to as high marsh. These are specific types of plants that grow at a slightly higher elevation, slightly different tidal inundation tolerance. So that's salt marsh hay and salt grass. And overall, yes, there were areas of ponding, but seeing relatively intact and healthy, densely vegetated. High marsh was, again, a positive thing to see compared to other systems that we work in. And then I guess I just wanted to point out that in a couple locations along the channel, there appeared to be some ditch spoils. So when they dug the ditches in the channel, they dumped the sediment on the side of the bank, of the marsh bank. And that actually provides a really nice, over time, it's providing a really nice, slightly higher elevation area for high marsh plants to grow. So we see salt marsh hay, marsh elder, and even some eastern red cedars, which are pretty salt tolerant, growing at that even slightly higher elevation. So just wanted to give you all kind of schematic here.
Yeah, and I think to your point earlier, asking why the marsh is in a bit better shape than what we're seeing elsewhere. The higher elevations make it that much more resilient to either sea level rise impacts, prolonged inundation, longer hydro period. Once you get to that lower marsh condition, and all marshes kind of transition to that lower marsh condition over the course of centuries or thousands of years, it has a tendency to slump lower and lower, become that much more vulnerable to things like persistent ponding, erosion, vegetation dieback, et cetera. So those naturally occurring slightly higher elevations in this system were encouraging, at least during this initial assessment.
And is it desirable to have diverse grasses?
It is. I'm caveating that by stating that in the vegetation types that are characteristic of New England salt marshes that are tidal, there's only maybe a dozen or so common species that can tolerate the salt. And in this system, we are seeing a pretty high diversity of them. But when you're actually on the marsh plain, it's only a handful. It's maybe only 4 to 6 that can tolerate that saltwater inundation twice a day, every day. So we are seeing good diversity here, but the diversity is more limited than in other areas because it's to tolerate the salty condition.
In recent years, we're having much more marsh flooding on a lot bigger tides. Sea level rise. The marsh is covered with water.
For longer periods of time.
You used to, maybe twice a month, full moon, new moon. Now it's this whole week it's been covered.
Yep.
I thought, another couple of questions.
Yeah.
Just could you remind me about the ditches? Like when were they dug? What was the purpose?
The ditches are very.
Well, even prior to mosquito control, or perhaps in the early stages of mosquito control, a lot of the ditches were dug in the 1930s as part of the Civilian Conservation Corps effort. So that's where you'll see a lot of these. And that's where most of the, where you see that extensive ditching that was all done.
Yeah.
Mosquito control primarily?
No, Civilian Conservation Corps, you could say, perhaps for the purpose of mosquito control, but I think a lot of it was just.
We still maintain those ditches right up into the 50s. There were still guys out there in the spring cleaning the ditches.
Maintaining, but there is not a whole lot of new ditching of, that degree going on.
Right.
Did it work?
No.
No.
And as folks know, I mean, living on the marsh or spending time out there, it did not make our fieldwork effort any easier to be navigating the number of ditches. So again, I mean, we've got something working in our favor from an elevation perspective, but with that many ditches on the marsh, they're in straight lines, they're not holes, but I'm going to use the Swiss cheese analogy. That's a lot of ditching out there. And as Mary pointed out on the next slide, the ditches are often the spot, if you advance one, Mary, where it allows erosion to kind of start propagating and then expand. And for folks like yourself who've lived on the marsh for decades or your whole life, you've probably seen them widen over time, and you've probably seen them get quite a bit wider, especially out by the channel where you've got the current going by. And so there has been pretty significant effort statewide to think a little bit differently about whether or not it makes sense to maybe restore marsh in areas that have been really heavily ditched. Maybe it makes sense if it's not effective for a mosquito control perspective and if 100 ditches could, or if 1 or 2 ditches could provide the same level of drainage as a dozen of them, does it make sense to maybe try to restore marsh over the top of those historic ditches? So as we start thinking about potential restoration actions, I'm sure that conversation will arise again.
Mary, can you get that one slide?
Yeah.
I wanted to go back to Jack's question about whether or not stormwater outfalls are correlated to areas of unvegetated marsh. Actually, it's sort of the opposite, because what happens is for these outfalls, you'll be getting some very concentrated discharges of sediment, which tends to localized, build up the plane of the marsh and fill in those tidal creeks. And then you'll also have fresh water inputs, which freshen all of the surrounding area. So that leads to sort of these dense stands of phragmites that you'll see. So instead of being associated with denuded or unvegetated areas, you're seeing and associating these with large areas of phragmites in the invasive reeds. So oftentimes that's how you can identify. There's an outfall, and you'll be going along and you'll see march, and then you'll see, a big stand of phragmites, and then you're back to march. It's very likely that there's some type of point source of fresh water or sediment coming around where you're seeing that stand of phragmites.
Yeah. And then to build on that, there, in the greater sense of how water quality or nutrients would affect a salt marsh and in salt water, that's its own kind of process as well, where we see higher above ground vegetation, meaning higher vegetation growth, but lower below ground vegetation growth, meaning the roots are smaller. So it's not doing as good of a job as holding together that peat. There's a lot of research going on about the effects of nitrification on salt marshes long term. So we could be seeing some evidence of that as well. Yeah.
Backing up to the very beginning, is Bailey Creek and the salt marshes along Bailey Creek included in your study?
I am not sure where Bailey Creek is.
That's the connection out to.
Yeah.
It is
Up here.
short
Oh, this one.
that runs south and east towards most of it's in Situate.
Mm-hmm.
But there's salt marsh on either side. It too is part of connected to this whole ecosystem, I would think.
Mm-hmm.
And Jack and I were just discussing potential
Including that.
potential, but the possible changes that we've seen out there as well.
Yep.
But starting from the marina at the Parker Avenue landing and going east, that is a section that I'm really withdrawing to. And perhaps the backside of Bassen Beach Island.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. I can't honestly remember how we drew the project area boundary, but we did cut that section out. I
It was
can't remember.
everything that was upstream of the.
Harbor.
Yes.
Yeah.
So up in.
Of the bridge. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Yeah.
Yep. That's a good point though.
But acknowledging, to your point, the connectivity and the fact that, we are likely in some similar conditions and stresses and adjacent system.
Yep. So just
Out there is they're jutting out into the creek from the marina. And over time now you can see more and more sections, slices, splitting and moving. I won't say exactly falling, but they're moving more than their head.
Yep. Yeah, that's a great observation. it's always great to have like firsthand local experiences. It is very, very helpful because we can't cover the whole system. We had 4 people out there, but we didn't cover every acre, so very helpful. But just wanted to kind of go over again our slew of stressors that we are most likely going to be thinking about as we work towards different restoration actions. Again, the ditches are a big part of the story here. It's a very clearly sort of trademark thing of this system. So we see widening and we see erosion of those ditches. There's a lot of restoration work going on to kind of understand how we can treat ditches over time for greater resilience of marshes, and also understanding how ditches could also be leading to some of the figure we see in this upper left-hand corner. So how it could be leading to ponding in between the ditches. There's a lot of work going into understanding how to combat the effects of that. So we do see some ponding in between these ditches or just out in the middle of the marsh platform. We also saw eroding along just the marsh edge in general, whether that be from currents, ice over the winter, just leaving off portions of the marsh. Sea level rise in general is going to be, chipping away at that marsh edge over time. And then we saw, we were trying to understand how docks could possibly be accelerating some of the erosion we're seeing. So it's not only shading out the vegetation around or under it, if you can imagine, during the summer months, but it's also those sort of pilings or, that infrastructure that's being hammered into the marsh is accelerating erosion around that area. So, yeah.
To the point on docks, I'd like to ask Charlotte, in your review of notices of intent for constructing docks, and I've seen new ones come up on Bailey Creek quite a bit. Are those impacts now being under consideration on the part of a conservation commission?
I would say absolutely. I mean, we've definitely seen a handful of dock applications over the last couple of years. And I think with the more information that we receive, the better we can evaluate these projects. Docks now are definitely built higher above the marsh with a height to width ratio where it's now at least 6 feet above the marsh to try and mitigate those shading impacts. But this is definitely something that I would really like to look at more with my conservation commission. Right now, we're making adjustments in the field. So we do have a project that's already been approved. I do a pre-construction site visit with the contractor where the center line of the dock is staked out. And I actually just saw one last week where you can see where the last set of pilings are going to go. And it's like, oh yeah, no, we don't want that there. So let's pull it back. And that may involve some amended permitting or minor fixes. But I think moving forward, our conservation commission, this is definitely another variable that we should take into consideration.
So the question I would have for you folks is, when you're driving pilings, as you mentioned, into the salt marsh, does that affect the stability of the bank? Would it accelerate, say, subsidence of that? I'll use the word earth, but or whatever underneath.
Yeah, I think that's a tough. In some ways, that's a tough question just because every project is site specific. And so the condition of the marsh in each of those given locations where a dock or pier might be proposed is going to vary a little bit. In general, driving piles into the marsh is not particularly conducive to maintaining really great stability. But I think that in that space, there is room to think about what the best management practices might be. And I think Jason has something to add, and if it's not traditional pile driving or pile installation, things like helical piers that can be installed without having that kind of pounding impact and destabilizing effect on marsh lane. There may be room or space for either a recommendation in the report or alternatively, as Charlotte continues to review so many of these projects, space to develop some best management practices for future projects.
We also do go by the current recommendations and guidelines from DEP, Visionary Industries, CZM. So there's I briefly mentioned there's a height width ratio for docks now that's recommended at 1.5 to 1, which is about 6 feet above the marsh. As you can, with the older docks, you guys may have seen that those docks are closer to the marsh. There might be more shading. There's also the orientation of docks. So if docks are facing on a north to south kind of orientation, which is better because then when the sun goes east to west, you have less potential for shading. So yeah, higher docks, orientation, spacing the pilings out as far as possible without compromising the structural integrity of the dock itself. And then also now looking at things like this of where those docks are ending up, where that compares to eroding edges. Also with floats, there's a whole other thing for floats. Happy to go over that as well, but yeah, so we do go, our commission does try to go by the current guidelines and everything that we receive from state and other regional departments.
Yeah, and I just do want to echo what Bill was saying about the DMF and the DEP best practices guidelines for docking piers. What I'd also like to mention is that in addition to the notice of intent and order of conditions from the Conservation Commission, docks and piers generally require also a Chapter 91 permit from DEP and an Army Corps of Engineers permit as well. So under section 10 and 4 of the Harbor Act. With regards to the Army Corps permit, I believe Chapter 91 as well, there's a standard provision there that says building the off-beat and not floating on the water. So it needs to be stored in a upland location. Frequently, dock and pier owners are unaware of this provision. They hire a consultant to design permit and construct the dock, and they get the permits, and then the dock goes in and, owner is happy. We're not realizing some of these conditions, so there might be an opportunity here to do some education on the part of the dock and pier owners to make sure that they're aware of those provisions prohibiting the storing of the float on the marsh plain, which clearly can impact the marsh.
And it's also the seasonal removal of that dock float if you're not doing it at the right time and you're dragging it obviously across the grass and not floating it off, that also has an impact. So that's definitely something that the town of Quasit, and I think also town of Situate, we want to work on educating people more, especially for the newer dock owners, because we're even seeing the floats being seasonally stored in the marsh with newer, projects. So that's definitely something that we are doing our best to educate people on, and unfortunately do enforcement if we have to, but we want to try with education first and make sure that everyone's fully aware of the impacts of what happens when you do something like that. If you had a dock for decades or if you just got one. But yeah, as Woods Hole Group is showing that the docks and the eroding edges, and then of course the storage of those floats can definitely have an impact in a certain area. And then obviously with the proliferation of docks, all the permits that we're seeing in the Gulf, Little Harbor, other areas, more dock structures are going in, which means, more boats, more floats, more, all that good stuff.
Right. Most of the maintenance is done by contractors, Harbor Warren.
Yes, yeah.
Wouldn't they know, shouldn't they know?
Yes, and I have definitely, I'm in active communication contact with that, Harbor Mooring and some of the other contractors. Yeah, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, you're never gonna get past.
Okay. This is the
Stressors and the marsh edge erosion, this is something that Jason and I, a lot of it, Jason's educated me on. A lot of us just go out and we look at the marsh, we see the edge eroding, we think something dramatic and tragic is happening to our marsh.
Right.
But a lot of that is just natural process. It's the sediment from the marsh edge that ends up back on top of the marsh. It keeps it healthy. And so I don't know if you could just say a little bit about natural process on top of this and how maybe another stressor that's not so much on here, but it's the space on the upland edge for the marsh to move into with that sediment that's coming off of the eroding edge.
Right. So you talk a little bit about marsh migration in a future slide. You guys are predicting my tempo here. Let me just go to this slide, but also to reinforce your point. So the way that marshes work is that they build elevation, vertically over time. And they also move kind of landward laterally over time. So they operate in some ways kind of like a barrier beach, but at a much slower pace. So sediment gets, again, eroded off of the marsh edge. That sediment works its way into the water. During high tide, the sediment comes out onto the marsh. And then as the marsh drains during low tide, that sediment builds in place on top of the marsh platform. So in a very nice world, that happens at the same rate as sea level rise. But what we're seeing is that it's not happening at the correct pace. Sea level rise is outpacing that elevation gain. So that's why we see a lot of marshes drowning in place. But marsh migration is another concept that a lot of restoration practitioners and conservationists are concerned about and interested in advancing. So this is this idea that marshes can move inland laterally as a response to sea level rise. So as you can imagine, the sea level is rising. That pushes the salt marsh plants further back upland. And so this is really our longest term adaptation solution for the survival of coastal wetlands and can really be facilitated by not developing right along the coast. And honestly, especially in Cohasset and Scituate, I think there is more opportunity for marsh migration than in other locations where you see a lot of development right along the edge of that marsh. And so it doesn't stand a chance to evolve and transgress back. So that is kind of the marsh migration 101, but we do map marsh migration potential. I don't mean to skip around on these concepts, but I guess we can just go over the fact that, so we took a look at data called the Sea Level Affecting Marshes model. It's a type of model that looks at elevation and sea level rise and kind of estimates changes to the marsh based on those things. So we kind of clip that data to the system to try to understand how the marsh might change over time. There's a lot to look at here, and we didn't quantify anything in this presentation, but you can kind of see the light green is high marsh, and so this is 2030. We still see that high marsh hanging on, but over time we see it slowly evolving to low marsh, which means, as I was talking about, it's kind of drowning in place. By 2070, we see almost all conversion to low marsh. And then by 2100, conversion to tidal flat. So with this model, we're able to understand, not only marsh loss in certain areas, but where can we gain marsh as well. So the upland gray area kind of shifting over time. If we zoom in on specific project locations, we can basically get a better estimate of where marsh migration is most likely to occur. So I guess I just wanted to summarize that with this kind of information, we're understanding the extent and distribution of the estuary's wetland classifications over time through these different time horizons. And then we were able to calculate the net changes in area for each of these habitat types. So we could see over time how many acres of high marsh there are between 2030 and 2100. And then we can also understand upland areas with more or less marsh migration potential with this data set as well. So, yeah.
What is that tan area with 2100?
The tan is what they're calling tidal flat. Yeah, so it means the vegetation's lost. It's essentially drowned in place. There's some caveats to this model. I mean, it's obviously predicting things out to 2100. It's limited its ability to capture other things at play, other dynamics in the system, but it does give us it's a good scoping tool for kind of zooming in on where we should focus our efforts and look at marsh migration potential. And also to jump back to, so task 2 was about looking into the future and understanding risk and vulnerability. So we looked at the marsh migration tool. This is also a way that we take a look at future flood risk. So this map shows, this provides you an example. This is again, just the northern reach, but we used the Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model to look at future mean high water shorelines. So that's thinking about tides where they would be reaching in the future. So not that you all can see very well, but this, the darker blue is showing you the mean high tide water line for 2030. And then the lighter, well, continuing to the lightest blue shows you higher time horizons, larger time horizons. But just some takeaways here is, you know, with this kind of mapping exercise, we can take a look at specific roads or intersections and see where high tide is going to eventually intersect with those pieces of infrastructure we might be concerned about. So this exercise was showing that as soon as 2050, we saw daily flooding that could occur along Westgate Lane. And then Seagate Circle, which is not in this figure, but is in the eastern reach, and then a portion of Hallett Street, which is in the southern reach. Not shown here. Yeah, Jack?
Yeah, could you guys, given what Alex was saying earlier about natural processes, if you build a seawall, you get immediate impact that it might prevent the flooding or the wave action that you want, right? It's going to happen right away. So could you talk a little bit about the scale of the timeframe rather for restoration activities? Because when I look back at those slides, I think, okay, it's essentially 2030 right now when you think about any restoration activity. So 2050 is literally right around the corner. So what I'm trying to drive at is in the best case scenario for restoration preservation activities, how long do things tend to take?
I think that's a good question. And I think that's why we project out different time horizons, because it always differs depending on your goal or your scale of the project, and what the community is really looking for. Yeah.
And
Adam, were you going to say something?
yeah, I was just as a follow-up, just to clarify your question, are you asking if the community has a look at these results and feels as though there's a certain urgency to act, maybe between that 2030 and 2050 planning horizon before things start to slip? Are you asking how long it might take to get a certain restoration action, wherever it might be, off the ground? Like, what is the timeline for change?
Like, how much restoration can you do to stave off the natural processes that's going to happen anyway?
Well, right?
Yeah.
Maybe,
You know, it's not a very articulate question.
But you're asking good questions, and which are important to have in this kind of discussion and this kind of because ultimately what it comes down to is it depends. Because, and I know people don't always like to hear that, but you know, oftentimes there's no bright line, there's no, you know, that type of thing. So going back to natural processes, as Alex said, people see a salt marsh cabin and they think, oh my God, this is horrible, we need to stop it. But that's actually a natural process and can actually contribute to salt marsh growth, expansion of the marsh plain. People see those tidal pools and they think, oh my God, it's a tidal pool. We gotta ditch this. Not every tidal pool is a bad fit. It's when there's some type of anthropogenic impact or influence that's causing that in a way that is interfering with marsh function. Because that's ultimately what we're looking at, is how is this marsh functioning? Because those pools having a positive, can have a very positive benefit on the function of the marsh. It's refugia for fish that get trapped in the high marsh, they have a place to go. Wading birds can forage there. It's when that pool starts to inhibit the function of the marsh. So when you're talking about remedial actions, what are you going to do to arrest change, for the lack of a better thing, or to turn the clock back in some cases? those vary wide. You can have small projects that can happen on a near term. You can have larger projects that are on a greater horizon, but again, what are you looking to change? Or what are you looking to prevent or alter? As Adam said, this marsh from a ecological resilience perspective is pretty well off because you have a lot of high marsh and that buys you time. Because what changes the way that marsh is functioning, going from low marsh to high marsh, it comes down to how frequently does the tide break that marsh and for how long? And that frequency and duration of flooding determines how it functions as a high marsh or a low marsh. In the intermediate term, in that 2050 to 2070 time frame, you're going with sea level rise, it's going to flood more frequently for longer. So you're not going to lose vegetation. It's going to transition from a high marsh, which is Payton's to stickless, that sort of thing, to alternate flora. But it's still going to be vegetated. That vegetation still provides great salt marsh function and habitat and all of that stuff. So again, it all goes back to what are you looking to do and why? And that's the conversation that these types of projects are looking to help foster.
Thanks. Sure.
Yeah.
Just a quick question on flood risk.
Mhm.
This says daily flooding, so this is not the 1 in 100-year storm type flooding that we showed there.
Right. This is looking at mean high water shoreline. So yeah, your daily tidal inundation, where that mean high water is hitting with sea level rise.
And the reason that that's important in this context is exactly what Jason just drove home, is that
Right.
for salt marshes, one of the biggest determining factors is hydro period, which is the period of time that that water has inundated the vegetative plain of the marsh. And so this gives us a sense of how much the hydro period might be prolonged over the course of time, and what areas in 2050 and 2070 will be getting wet that aren't getting wet now.
Yeah. Or in addition, if you're looking at more of the built infrastructure surrounding the marsh, understanding where that tide is creeping up and going to make some of these structures more vulnerable over time is also something that we look at with this stuff. Yeah.
Causes a die off to give us this ponding areas. For instance, if you come down in a straight line from Summer Island to where the river makes a 90-degree turn and a 90-degree turn, at that little point, there was right in there, there was a very small ponding area. And it has grown by leaps and bounds over the last several years.
Mm-hmm.
And that one on the other side, that blue area, you can see the big pond, to the right.
Over.
Up
here.
Right in there. That's a huge ponding area.
Yeah.
It stayed huge, but it's slowly getting bigger. That's a really big one. But that one on that point there that was brand new a few years ago. And it's slowly getting bigger. So what causes them to grow? Is it subsidence of the ground, or is it caused by environmental conditions, chemicals? Or?
It could be a lot of those things. It could be all of those things. I'd say like the biggest driver is probably sea level rise and poor hydrology. So the water isn't, because of the micro topography of the marsh, there's certain areas that pond, and then that is just not able to drain. And so with sea level rise, they weren't necessarily being inundated a bunch, but now these elevations are underwater more frequently. So there's also, we could talk more about how many different factors are at play. There is things like ditching can accelerate sort of pools in between the ditches. Just because of over time lack of maintenance of the ditches could have led to more bare areas in the middle. Because of improper drainage off the marsh platform. So I think in summary, it's poor drainage during high and low tides. I don't know, Adam, if you have any other.
Just reinforce that we typically see from the remainder of the marsh. But to Jason's point as well, like this mosaic of habitat. Some areas that have salt pans, some areas that are more persistent and have some of that higher microtopography, like the areas of the dredge spoils directly along the channel. I don't think that typically we're not looking for a marsh to be 100% homogeneous. We really like to see some variability from a habitat perspective. But to Jason's point, it's when one type of factor, like expanding pools, starts to dominate the landscape and drive the other forces on the marsh, where it might make sense to take some remediative or restoration action.
Yeah, or you're just seeing no vegetation, like a bare marsh. That's usually, not a positive thing. There's something wrong there. Yeah. Oh. Nina, can you hear us? Oh, I have to be allowed to talk.
Oh, if they're in the audience, yeah, we might be able.
Am I unmuted?
Hi, Nina. Yes, you're unmuted.
Oh, good, thanks. I can't see anything except the great displays on the. So first of all, thank you for all this amazing work. I would love to know what a tidal flat looks like, because it does look like in the future, all of this a significant portion of what right now is a very nice, beautiful high marsh or even a slightly low marsh is going to be a tidal flat. So what does that look like?
Do you want to give that definition?
Well, I guess I'm thinking about a local example, and at low tide in the harbor, I think just downstream the spillway, isn't there a pretty substantial tidal / mud flat? Did you want to provide that answer?
Just past the breakwater, that kind of a tidal flat?
I'm asking Charlotte just for clarification because I'm thinking about us deploying the tide gauges on the flat.
Oh, you mean, sorry, do you mean, oh man, sorry, which area again?
It's downstream of the system. Adjacent is at the yacht club.
Right, yes, so there's
a pretty substantial mud flat adjacent the channel that our folks had to wade out through.
yeah,
So just to answer the question, is it Nina who's online? So a mud flat or a tidal flat is more consistent with an unvegetated kind of fine-grained muddy system rather than the vegetated marsh plain that exists there now.
If you go down to Parker Ave.
yeah.
And at low tide and look off to your right.
Yeah.
That's what.
I know my brain was trying to figure out which areas. I was like, wait, I know where you're talking about, but not visually in my brain. So,
Okay.
And we have, there are a few spots that we've seen around Cohasset, whether it's on the Gulf, Little Harbor, where you are starting to see that transition to tidal flat. And it's definitely good to note where those are in this system as part of the study as well.
Well, it looks to me like the Pegram Conserve is going to be a huge tidal flat. So that very much changes the view and the whole ecosystem over there if it's a tidal flat. First of all, you can actually, I assume you'd be able to navigate over it at high tide. It would be a covered tidal flat at high tide. I mean, this is what I'm wondering. It's interesting. It'll be a completely different ecosystem if those are tidal flats. And that wasn't too far off, it looked like to me. So anyway.
And in that area as well, we did notice a larger concentration of ditches. And so that was one area in particular where, obviously a little too early right now in terms of our restoration plan, but we were looking at that particular area of, okay, how many ditches do we actually need there to still achieve that hydrology and flow? And then can we restore some of those? Will that make a difference? Will that make the marsh more resilient? So yeah, there's definitely areas along the Gulf and Cohasset and Scituate that have larger concentrated areas of ditches as well. And that can also increase the, speed things up to turn things into the tidal ecosystems.
Right. But so I guess my question is, well, I grew up, my parents owned that house right there on River Road that's on the Pegram Conservation Trust. And my brother and his wife now live there. So I'm very familiar with that whole area. And I guess I was trying to understand when you were talking about the natural tidal marsh migration, would that be a natural thing that or is it because of the degradation of the high marsh that it would become a tidal flat? You know what I'm saying? And so is this a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, it sounded to me like it would be better to fill in the ditches and do whatever you had to do to maintain the high marsh. But I also heard you say that there is a natural migration, especially as sea levels are rising. And if we're not going to be stopping the sea level rising anyway, then this is just kind of the natural flow of things. So I guess I'm wondering where that stands.
Yeah, that is an excellent question and something that, restoration practitioners think about all the time. So, yeah, where is it worth putting in the effort to save pieces of marsh? I think everything in combination is the best solution. So, extending the lifespan of the current marsh that's in place, but also allowing the marsh to migrate over time, over a longer time scale, would be something that we would suggest in this area. And that area that you're talking about is actually somewhere that we had noticed marsh migration kind of already happening, just back behind that rock wall. And we saw some effects of saltwater on some of the trees. So that is one of the areas I think within this greater project area that could be an area of focus for marsh migration.
Yeah, interesting. All right. Well, thank you. This has been really informative.
Great.
Thank you, Nina.
Yeah.
If you look at where the Pigram's Brook comes out there, the point that already used to die off of some of the cedar trees and stuff. So that probably indicative of the marsh migration.
Yep. That's what we look for. Exactly. Okay. I think I had one more slide before we. Oh. And just to high level review the same data set that we were using to look at mean high water shorelines for the future. We're also looking at future flood risk as far as, flood risk and vulnerability just on a storm basis or based on an elevation. How frequently should we expect a storm or tides to flood a given area? So this map, again, kind of hard to key in on some takeaways, but this is showing you different annual flood exceedance probabilities. So the gray area, the 100% flood exceedance probability, is saying that you would expect flooding at least one time a year in those areas. So as you move to the left on that scale bar, that's a less likelihood of flooding as far as the legend.
Your point, or the gentleman sitting next to Jason, about whether that previous figure was focused on storms, and that was just mean high water, high tide conditions. This is the output from the Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model. It is a publicly available data set, and it starts getting at what flood risk looks like under those storm conditions. So to Mary's point, the gray shows the estimated flood extent during your annual storm, so your typical winter nor'easter, and then it ramps up during more intense return period storms all the way up to the 0.1,000 year storm. And this is less important from a marsh resilience perspective, because certainly the marsh can take an impact from a coastal storm. Coastal processes occur, sediment becomes mobilized, you might have some erosion of the marsh plain, but it remains resilient to storms. But this starts getting at the criticality of some of the infrastructure surrounding the marsh. So where does it make sense to be investing in resilient infrastructure, and where does it potentially make sense to start pulling back some critical assets from right at the edge of the marsh?
Does that data take into account the recent findings of an acceleration of sea level rise?
That's a good question. It does. And it also used a very conservative sea level rise scenario, which means it used a pretty intense sea level rise scenario because the state wanted to take a fairly conservative approach with these data, because they were using it for infrastructure planning, not for I'm not trying to diminish small roads in Cohasset, but they were taking into consideration these results for planning for the Boston Artery and the tunnel system. And major infrastructure statewide. So to your point, they did take a conservative approach with their projection.
And Adam, with this model, I think you would explain that it's also it's more unlikely that the model would show something, you know what I mean? Like it
overestimates. Yeah.
Right.
That's the play.
Thank you. Yeah.
That's correct.
Yep. Okay. I think we've moved through all of the slides. But thank you all. That was so engaging and great. These are some questions that we had. I don't know, Charlotte, if
Yeah,
you want
absolutely.
to take it from here, but looking for some general feedback.
Yeah, Mary, before you wrap it up and turn it over to Charlotte, or just as you're wrapping it up,
Yeah.
could you just reiterate, I don't think we need to flip back through, but just reiterate what we're gonna be working on over the next couple months and when we expect to
Right.
reconnect with the group?
Right. So based on all of the information that we showed you all, we are, as a team, taking a closer look at what some next steps could be, what potential locations we might want to focus in on, and then also thinking about different kinds of restoration actions for the system. So we will be coming up with a slew of different ideas, and then with the technical committee or other members of the project team, we're going to be kind of prioritizing those and narrowing them in. So the report will be written and we'll mention all of these potential actions that could be taken. But I think the important part is that we're kind of prioritizing them and understanding what should be done first in a shorter versus longer time frame. And then our design team comes up with some conceptual figures to start to try to better visualize what should be done in a given area. So we'll be focusing in on 3 different locations. Yeah.
Much of the presentation was focused on sort of erosion of the marsh and so on, but you also mentioned early on water quality. I was wondering what water quality looks like. I mean, there's a trend towards more nitrates in the water, towards more algae bloom, which is worsened by temperature, higher summer temperature, and so on. We have a lot more residential development along Gulf River, which probably contributes to the pollution problem. I mean, what do we need to do to get, say, the Gulf River to the point where the North River is where you could actually open shellfish plates?
Well, we've got a lot of experts.
I was going to say, we definitely have a lot of water quality experts there. Anne and Jack and Charlie, is that something? Yeah. Sorry to put you guys on the spot.
Can't have the stressors, the nitrogen. And
right.
nutrient load.
Mm-hmm.
That's coming from.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I like your ideas of doing mitigation right at those stormwater drains or
yeah,
or even upstream intercept.
Yeah.
Get there.
Yeah. But yeah, to summarize, this grant does encompass water quality components and sort of habitat restoration components, and all of that will come together in this final report.
And in that, as part of that, our second public meeting will be later this year. I'll definitely notify people way more in advance. But yeah, over the next handful of months, we're going to be looking at all this data and coming up with our, draft restoration report and our final report of all the conditions that we kind of summarized to you today. And with that being said, the second public meeting, maybe in Situate is what we're thinking, but we'll definitely give a lot of people fair notice to try and attend that either remotely or in person. And then we would make the, information available as well so that people can look at it beforehand. And we would hope to have a really good conversation with that public meeting on how to fine tune a lot of those restorations and priorities. Hi, Alex.
Yeah, I just want to make a point to your water quality question. So I'm working on a project in Estuary, similar questions. And the state regulates water quality once it passes a certain threshold in terms of impairment. And so what Duxbury is really wrestling with right now is they're really headed that way in Duxbury Bay. So they exceeded some of those thresholds. And so the state will sooner or later be imposing restrictions on things that they can do in terms of development. And so that town is trying to get ahead of that and make their own decisions for themselves about restricting nutrient loading. And that includes good landscaping practices, good golf course management practices, with a huge golf course in the area. A lot of things, septic practices, a lot of things that the community and the residents and the towns can do in advance before they happen. And so, Duxbury's considering things like good landscaping pledge, so that landscapers in town pledge to use best practices in terms of time of year fertilization, mountain for. And so there's things you can do in town in Situate, Cohasset to kind of get out ahead of water.
Will you have more information?
I can give you my card.
And share those recommendations.
Yep.
Charts available for us to see closer up and where.
For the charts in the presentation? Yeah. So we can definitely post the slides to our Cohasset Conservation Commission office page, and I can, if you guys would like to also write down your emails on your way out or your contact information, I can definitely share that as well with you directly. But we will be posting it to our Conservation Commission office page website. I think Situate will post it obviously on their site or somewhere similar. So yeah, we will have these available, and then the recording will also be posted as well for you guys to look at. Hi, Fran.
Here we go. Back in the 70s, we had algae blooms out there that where the mats were so thick in mid-June to mid-July, that you couldn't roll boats.
Yeah.
It went bad. And of course, when they died, they released sulfite gas, which wasn't too pleasant. Now, if we look at Little Harbor, lagoon by the Little Harbor, up end of Little Harbor, that used to be the same and worse. And we sued that whole area now, and now the water's actually clearing it. So the algae blooms that we had in the Gulf were essentially from runoff from homes, and with that people were using laundry detergents with high phosphorus contents. So that's gone away. Now, the last few years, we have had some algae blooms, not bad. I don't know where they're coming from. But we do have them, but nowhere near as bad as we used to. We had that for about a month, mid-June to mid-July, and then there'd be a few elements later on in the season. But it was nothing like we used to have. Now what we're having is something's killing the roots of the marsh grasses.
Right.
And whether it's nitrogen for lawn, but all of the lawn fertilizing, that whole Bound Brook area, that goes all the way up into Norwell and Hingham. So we've got a huge watershed that's bringing all that stuff down and it's focusing right in that area. So I don't know what can be done about that, because you mentioned good landscaping practices, and everybody's got to have the greenest of green lawns. I know my lawn's got dandelions, and I think yellow and green is a nice color combination.
Great for pollinators too. And we do, just so that you guys are aware, we do have from a local regulatory end, the Conservation Commission's wetlands bylaws and rules and regulations do not allow chemicals, herbicides, fertilizers, rodenticides, anything like that within 100 feet of any wetland resource area within the floodplain and within the riverfront area. With that being said, as much as I would love to drive around 24/7, it's really difficult to kind of look for that. I do use every single permitting application as an opportunity to explain that to homeowners. I work with a handful of landscapers, contractors, developers. We have it as conditions in our permit. But with that being said, even though it's a small town, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of properties that are near wetlands, rivers, streams, the ocean. So it's definitely an educational and an enforcement, but also another restoration type effort. And so at least on the regulatory end, we have some things in place, but that could definitely be improved. Of what we could look at for Cohasset specifically versus what Situate may or may not do. Hi.
After the report comes out in December.
Yes. So do we want to go back to our timeline maybe? Sorry, that might be all the way back at the beginning.
Well, what comes next after the report is produced is a great question.
Yeah, right.
Well, the idea is that we would have some project concepts or ideas to carry forward to future grant rounds. So
that's like with the finalization of the restoration report, we would definitely look at those from the town of Cohasset and Situate side. The Coastal Habitat and Water Quality Grant Program through CZM is an opportunity to advance those projects, but there are also are other grant opportunities to look at that have different project goals and priorities and eligibility. So we would definitely be targeting a lot of these restoration recommendations and projects probably through grants. There'll be other, smaller opportunities to obviously provide education outreach, but so that's kind of our goal, after the report is completed and it's published and we can see it, we're definitely going to take those and immediately start turning those around and seeing if we can apply for the next future upcoming grant cycles.
So the funding, anything recreation.
I think a large portion of it, but there are other opportunities as well that we could explore on the town's end. I'm not sure if any of this would qualify for CPC funding, but there might be, other efforts that we could explore financially that, we could look at, especially with higher priority items. Maybe there's other opportunities for the town at town meeting or whatnot, but yeah, I would say definitely a really good opportunity for a lot of the funding would come through grant projects.
Could you flip back to the task slide? You have a task.
Sure.
So task 3, 5, 3, 4, and 5 are sort of what's ahead.
Yes.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, so taking everything, what we have, putting that together, drafting it with our technical committee team, and then preparing all that for our upcoming public meeting later this year, probably in the fall. I don't want to commit to a certain month, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you guys. We really appreciate your time. We love your feedback. And if you guys do want to leave me your contact information, I can definitely keep you posted directly. Otherwise, we'll definitely be posting everything to our Conservation Commission office page for Cohasset. And thank you everyone who joined us remotely in the audience. And we appreciate your time tonight. Thank you. Thanks. And thank you all presenters and support team members.
Yeah.
Thank you guys. It's exciting.
I heard. Long. Yeah. And then it's